Because of you, I got one. And I haven't brought it.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Architecture Program's lecture series. For today, we have invited Roger Schwabacher, who is the design principal for HOK's Washington, D.C., Tampa, and Miami studios. He has been based in the firm's Washington, D.C. office since 2004. Roger's experience includes architectural, urban, sustainable design for a wide range of building types, including government, corporate, higher education, commercial office, healthcare, science and technology, hospitality, civic and cultural, retail, and residential. His work, including 3 U.S. embassies and master plans for up to 400,000 residents, has earned numerous awards and has been published in Architectural Record, the Washington Post, Inform Architecture and Design, ENR, Middle East Architect, and ArchDaily, the Architect's newspaper, Cityscape, and many other venues. His design for CAPSARC was the first and is still the largest lead for homes project outside of North America. Roger is a member of HOK's Global Design Board, the University of Maryland School of Architecture Board of Visitors, the American Institute of Architects, and the U.S. Green Building Council. I had the pleasure of meeting Roger a few months ago after I joined the University of Maryland. And we had a conversation about his wonderful projects in other countries. And then I realized that this really aligns with the global mission that we are having in our architecture program. And that's why I invited him to have a lecture and present his projects to our wonderful students here. And he generously accepted our offer. And we are really thankful and we are grateful to have him here. Thank you so much.
Does this work? Can you hear me? Turn down.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Well, Mohammed, thank you for that introduction. That's a little embarrassing. It's a long introduction. And so thank you to my marketing department at HOK for writing all of that. It's really a pleasure to be here today. It's good to see all of you. It's kind of a full circle for me, having gone here, graduated 25 years ago from the master's program here at Maryland. So it's really nice to be back and see the school thriving, everything, advancing so much since the time when I was here. As Mohammed mentioned, I'm going to do a lecture today. I've titled it "How to Design in a Place That's Not Your Home." And it's really going to be based on regionalism, critical regionalism, and what it means to take the culture of a place. And I see someone shaking their fist. That's good. Take the culture of a place and incorporate the ideas of traditional sort of architecture and traditional ways of building, into modern forms, while not giving up, the idealism of modernism and sort of the progression of things that we've gone into with modern structure today. So I just want to start out with a little background work. There we go. A little bit of my background and kind of how I got to where I am with designing this international work. So around 15 years ago, so I've been with HOK, my firm down in Georgetown, for about 20 years now. 15 years ago, we did our first international design competition to do a project in Saudi Arabia, which is up here on the screen right now. So this was for CAPSARC, which is the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. So it's a research think tank for the future of energy once the oil runs out in Saudi. That was their mission. So we actually we did the master plan for the whole campus, which has 2 sides to it. So it's the research center, which we partnered with Zaha Hadid Architects in London. So they did the major office kind of component to it. And then we won the residential side, which are a couple of the buildings you see here. So it's 200 building campus we designed, including housing, villas and apartment buildings and a mosque. I think I have a mosque. Next slide. A mosque that we designed for the community, and everything from the recreation center to the grocery store and bus stops, everything. So we designed an entire community. And I was actually just telling Mohammed, I just got back from there. I was there last week. Just got back from there. They've come back and rehired us, designed a new college for them on this site. So it's it's really good to get a repeat client and continuous work. And that's sort of the theme of this is once you get started with international work, you make a reputation for yourself, in different countries. The work sort of just, continues to come. So this was done in 2013. And with the success of that, we won a whole slew of other projects. So we won a 400,000 resident city, which you see the master plan on the top. This is in Dhahran, which is on the east coast of Saudi Arabia. And it's halfway built right now, believe it or not. So the first phase is the right-hand side of the screen. Around, a third of the site is already built. The houses, the schools, and the mosques, and the retail, everything is up. We designed the master plan, and then we designed all the major commercial buildings. We designed the shopping mall and the apartment buildings. Then we were hired to design an arts district near a Snøhetta design cultural center in Dhahran. So this is the picture of the hotel. We were involved with university work in Saudi Arabia. And then recently, we just were hired to do this arena in Riyadh. So this is, believe it or not, in the middle of the desert. It's ice hockey and tennis and, performing arts arena near the international airport. So it'll be one of the first buildings you see when you enter the capital. And then associated hotel and a multimodal center and performance stage outside and a retail mall associated with all of that. So we didn't just work in Saudi, but from there we kind of took off with this work. We recently just completed this project in downtown Doha in Qatar. This was, I think, 12 blocks in their new downtown. And the mission of this project was really to create a regional language for the country, for Qatar, not based on any kind of international style that could be anywhere, but really create a language that resonated with the people. So you'll see the amount of windows is limited in these buildings. We really tried to create facades that really reacted to the harsh environment and really trying to create screens and language that felt at home in the place instead of these twisting and turning kind of glass towers, which is in their current downtown. And then a few years ago, we finished this. So this is a tower in Abu Dhabi. This is a 72-story tower for ADNOC, which is the big oil company in the UAE in Abu Dhabi. Once again, perfect sustainable diagram where the major facades are facing north and south. They're the glassy facades just where you want them to be. And the east and west facades are solid because that takes on the majority of the heat gain. So what this project was really to make the most mature building in their skyline, because ADNOC is like their bedrock of their economy. This is the bedrock of where their money comes from, the oil. So instead of the other kind of towers in the background, we really want to make a very mature and timeless expression for them. So we moved on to Oman. We designed a new science and technology university in Muscat. If any of you have a chance to travel to Oman, some of the most down to earth and welcoming people I've met on the planet. Just a wonderful experience there. You can see the mountain ranges in the background and how the major buildings kind of frame views out into the landscape. And then outside of the Middle East, we've done competitions in Asia, Southeast Asia. We did this competition for a video game company in Seoul in South Korea. NCSoft, I don't know if it's familiar with you guys. I don't know this company, but their existing headquarters is the building on the left across the street, and we developed 2 new buildings for them. And then I've been doing a lot of work with the State Department, which is really good work here in the DC region. We design US embassies around the world. This one we recently, we did the building on the left, which was the original embassy building in the early 2000s, and then recently completed the building on the right, which is the Chancellery building, which is really, or the Consular building, I'm sorry, which is about the interaction between the Russian people and the United States. Now, obviously, this project is hard to get to right now. You know, we can't do a lot of more development in Moscow with our relationship there. But it was a really, beautiful city. It still is a very beautiful city and a really rewarding project to make these kind of spaces to talk about diplomacy and the interaction between the peoples of the two countries. And from there, I worked on the US Embassy in Hong Kong. And actually, I was just talking to Mohammed. After being in Saudi Arabia last week, I took a trip to Turkey because we're competing for the US consulate in Adana, Turkey right now. So that kind of shows the kind of work I've been doing in the past 15 years with HOK, the international work I've been doing, and kind of the basis of the theme for today's lecture is, how to establish a language for a place that's rooted in the ideas of the past. So none of these forms that I showed you look like traditional buildings. We're not copying traditional forms, but we're really thinking about the ideas behind building that's come back for centuries in each of these places. And how do you take those ideas? How do you think about the climate? How do you think about materiality? How do you think about really construction techniques that have been used? And how do you apply them to modern projects? So how do you take the ideas from the past, not the forms of the ideas, and adopt them to modern architecture for its progressive qualities? And what I mean by that is, equity in coming into spaces, sustainability, neurodiversity, all the things where the buzzwords of what we're talking about today when you're designing spaces. How do you apply those, to these traditional ideas and combine them to make a real project that responds to its place, but also responds to modern needs for these structures? So I'll just walk you through a few of the ideas that we consider in the beginning of a project when we first design something. The first question is, how to interact with the local climate, utilizing things such as sun and wind. So it's very similar to what you guys, I assume, do here in school, is you think about how are you, if it's in a hot place, how do you utilize the winds to cool off outdoor spaces? Really a big thing that I try to do in my designs is blend the indoor and the outdoor. So how do you do that in a inhospitable environment such as the Middle East? You do that by capturing the winds, whether through wind towers or whether through orientation of the building. How do you make those winds when you want them in the winter months come through? And maybe the hot winds that you don't want in the summer, how do you block them? So how do you form the building to capture those winds to make it a nice environment? And then, of course, the sun, how do you orient the building so the major facades don't take a lot of heat gain? How do you shield? How do you shield from heat gain from the sun with different techniques? And then thinking about the local topography. So this is an aerial view. On the left, you'll see that's the Zaha Hadid building that I helped their office work on in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So that's an Energy Research Institute. And then across the street is where we're developing that new arena. And part of the idea of this project is there's these dry riverbeds in the Middle East called wadis. So it's where the water naturally collects in the desert and kind of forms these green alleyways when it does rain. The few times of year it does rain, these wadis become very green and lush. So a major part of our design for both of these projects was take the existing wadis and have them travel around the buildings, have them form the partie for the whole master plan, organize spaces around them to reinforce the wadis. And one thing we did here is even have, you can see, we have a land bridge coming across the highway. So how do we heal things that were broken by man-made roads and connect things together? So the wadi now on both sides of the highway is connected for wildlife and for pedestrian pathways around the city. And how to relate to neighboring structures. in terms of scale, views, and connection. Some of the projects I've shown before, we're in the desert, but this one is in the middle of Moscow, downtown Moscow. The embassy we designed there was directly across from the Russian White House and has views to these towers that Stalin built around Moscow. And that's one of the towers you see between our two buildings. So how do you frame the views? How do you relate to the architecture around you? How do you deal with context? It was very frustrating to me if you just see an elevation of a building alone without seeing the context. And how do you even know how to begin to analyze it without seeing what's around it and what you're designing? And then finally, how to incorporate regional tectonics and local materials filled with patterns and textures. So this is another mosque that I designed on the east coast of Saudi Arabia. But it was really thinking about natural forms and connecting. This one was right on the ocean. It was right on a beachfront property. So how, it was a nautilus shape that responded to kind of things in the environment, but also the crescent form, that it's seen a lot in Muslim architecture. So how do you connect to that? And how do you connect to regional materials and kind of regional patterning? A lot of times we take what's called traditional mashrabiyah screens, which are screens to sunshade a lot of the structures. And how do you abstract that to a modern language to make it seem relevant to today's work? So the methods that I've worked with over the past couple of years to really achieve this, how do you even start on a project like this? When you don't know about the culture you're designing in, you're in a new place that you've never been before. What are the initial techniques that you might want to do? Obviously, a ton of research up front. Read about the country, about the people. You want to go there on site visits, meet people, walk the city, walk the site. Talk to everyone. Client interviews. By the time an architect gets a project, it's probably years in the making. I mean, we tend to forget about that. By the time you're awarded a project, they've lined up the funding, probably for years in advance to think about what they want to do. So pick their brains. What is their vision of the project? Why are they building this now? Why is this the moment for this building to come up? Partnering with local designers. A lot of times you don't want to take a project all the way through by yourself. You want to partner with a local firm that knows about the local construction market, that knows about local design techniques. So you partner with those local firms, so you share knowledge about what you're doing. And then forming international teams. One of the most rewarding things that I found is really on these large projects we've done, especially the campuses we've done, partnering with firms from around the world. On that project I showed you in Oman, we had the steel coming from Korea, we had the curtain wall coming from China, we had the client from Oman and the design from the US. I mean, it was just this true international team. And while sometimes that caused meetings to be slow, but sometimes it was hard to communicate. It was sort of the universal language of drawings and math that really brought everything home. So I found when I first started presenting, I would say things once, kind of get blank stares from the audience, say it a second time, no reaction. Maybe the third or fourth time, everyone would go, oh, and then I knew I could go on to the next one. So what I found was better is to start sketching and start drawing. And once they see it on paper, then it's clear to everyone, the intent of what you're trying to do. So once again, the theme is like mediating between the global and local languages of architecture, linking to place and context while allowing a certain autonomy of the object. And to really illustrate this, instead of just talking about words, I really wanted to show a detailed case study of a project about how we did this. And I thought that might resonate with all of you, just to see one competition. So this is a competition we recently completed, and how we went about doing this, for a big international competition. So this was a competition we recently joined. We were the Ministry of Defense in Saudi Arabia, which was a bit controversial a client if you think about it at first, but Saudi Arabia has been a huge partner of the United States for many years, a strategic partner. And this was going to be their version of the Pentagon. So they came with us with a 3 million square foot program you know, a plot of land in the desert with nothing there, and said, how would you go about designing for us, you know, our version to unite all of our different military forces in a single building. So that was the challenge. So it starts with a little animation that we did. I wanted to show you. Hope this works.
Gazing at the Saudi desert, you'll notice a sparkle on the dunes. What you see are desert diamonds, natural gemstones. Inspired by these gems, the design follows nature by forming a striking crystalline form. The choreographed approach to the building is integrated into the master plan. Intersecting the natural wadi, the headquarters will be a part of Riyadh's sustainable future. A dramatic cut in the corner gives a glimpse of the shining inner world. Dramatic cantilevered walls shade sunken gardens at the building's base. A grand central space fosters a joint sense of mission. Dynamic spaces allows activity focused on joint operations. Efficient and safe design that empowers military command. Access to protected gardens for moments of calm. Grand stairs encourage wellness and connection between groups. Support buildings and logistics will demonstrate technological innovation. Unified programmatic functions will exemplify operational excellence. A pure form in the desert, a symbol of Saudi strength, and a source of pride for the future.
We were at, I went over there about 6 months ago to present that to the Minister of Defense for Saudi Arabia. There were 16 shortlisted for the competition, and we were narrowed down to 3. So fingers crossed, this is one we're still waiting to hear on. But I thought it was a good case study to start talking about regionalism and how we might design in a different place. You know, that was very foreign to a lot of people on the team. So we gathered together, you know, in HOK, we have 25 offices around the globe. And to tackle a project of this scale, I tapped designers across multiple of our offices. We worked with our New York team on the landscape. We worked with our San Francisco team on the sustainable design. We tapped our London team on some of the urban design. And then out of DC, we did the architectural design. So it was a true kind of grouping of kind of the best minds in my firm to try to come up with this solution for everyone. And it was really the idea, the initial idea is how to make something that really represents the importance of this building, kind of this symbolic importance of a building that might represent their country. It's like the Pentagon does for the US, how to make a dramatic form that really resonates with kind of the mission of what's going to go on there. So while I saw the other team's competition entries when we went to present there, we all presented in one big ballroom together, which was fascinating to me to see the other entries. A lot of the other entries had multiple buildings and kind of a campus. And we were the only ones that had this singular kind of form to represent kind of the seriousness of the mission. You know, really kind of timeless, kind of ageless form is what at least I was going for in this design. And how does that connect, you know, as we talked about before, so how does that connect to the landscape? How does that connect to the environment we're working in? So similar strategy of what we did for our Capstart project, you know, there are these dry riverbeds around Saudi Arabia in the desert. And as opposed to the other projects where we had our buildings sort of flanking these wadis, our building could maybe intersect the wadi and really start transforming how the wadi did on its edges. And this had multiple reasons for doing this. First, security. The wadis, you know, have these berm sort of landscape forms, so it acts as security for the building, preventing people from the highway of getting close. So it had a very practical sort of function. And also symbolically, you know, how this building kind of sits within the landscape was really important for the feeling of the project, to have it surrounded by nature and interacting with the natural environment. And you'll see from the form, we also thought about how the building sat. And I know it looks very futuristic. One of the people on the jury apparently is the crown prince in Saudi Arabia. He's very interested in Star Wars. So we thought about kind of these futuristic forms and how it all might play out. But how this one sits on the ground. So it's like an inverted pyramid in a way. You know, obviously that's a very defensive form, which is good for Ministry of Defense building. Ancient ravelins, you know, had these kind of forms on the walls so people couldn't scale the walls. But then how does it come down and sit on its face? So we took a triangular form, cranked it a certain number of degrees and created these gardens around the base of the building. You'll see the gardens are sunken down, and that's because to give security to these spaces. So people in the base of the building could come outside and go back inside without going through the main security at the front door. So it gives these protected spaces, these sunken gardens, each with its own different character on three sides of the base of the building. Thinking about entry and progression towards the site, you know, we really did choreograph the views of the building as you come around and as you come across this main bridge, which came over one of the water elements that we designed in order to collect stormwater on the site. It's very hard to do water in the desert, but this is integrated with our sustainable design strategy, which I'll touch on later. And then, you know, it's the corner that was cut away to give a glimpse of sort of that life and that activity inside the building, which was really important. While most of it, you know, is very obscure about what's going on intentionally, we wanted one kind of hint about the interior spaces. Here's a view, you know, of those gardens and really, you know, that blending of indoor-outdoor space. We talked about how to utilize shade. So the building having a cantilever, the building having a form, you know, made the shade for the outdoor spaces around it. So that was very intentional to have these gardens pushed up close to the base of the building and using the building, which is rather tall, you know, to create the shaded outdoor spaces, which would make it, you know, pleasant to use year round. And then once you came into the middle, the building is all about collaboration between these different groups. And you have to think about when you're bringing different basically organizations, different branches of the government together in one building, they don't know each other and there's going to be a lot of resistance. We talk a lot with our clients when we go through programming about change management. Like how do you change people's minds and how do you get people used to the idea before they even move into a building? And it's really important to have the occupants of the building involved in the process and comfortable with what's happening, because a lot about their day-to-day lives of working is going to be different. So how do you create those kind of central spaces, collaboration spaces, spaces for informal interaction between people that's really going to foster that collaboration. You'll see in the middle is really, you know, this shining orb in the middle with a series of bridges coming to it. It's that central auditoriums and kind of meeting spaces where the different branches could come together in this dramatic moment. And then you'll see these scoops or these tunnels, and that was part of our strategy of venting out the space with our mechanical system in order to get the circulation of air into the space. And not a lot of sunlight. You know, we have a series of screens on the top to really limit the amount of sunlight. I'm sure you guys have all seen the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, you know, how those screens really make these magical kind of beams of light coming down into the space. So really controlling how the light enters the space was key to our design. And plan, you know, it was a perfect triangle, kind of a timeless form, as opposed to the pentagon that we have here. Here we had this perfect kind of pyramid shape, which kind of contracted as it went down. So these rings of spaces creates different scales of atrium and public space between them. So the view before was of that central space in the middle, with the circle being that orb hanging in the middle of the space. But then you have a series of atrium around all the workspace. So in a building this massive, a building this size, how do you organize spaces so there's a variety of environments for people to work in? There's a series of bridges connecting those spaces together. And I'll show you a little bit later on, you know, how we had a variety of interior fit out of those offices to create different kinds of environments for different groups. Here's a view of those edge atriums and how that would work. So they're one of the walls, the exterior walls is canted. So we canted the interior walls too, but how you make these dynamic spaces to work in, bringing in that natural light, but also creating that series of protective sort of envelopes so people, can't see what's going on inside the building. And here's just a section just to start explaining the space and how it works. And we really did a deep dive study, into those skylights, how they were oriented. We have each skylight facing true north to not take on a lot of heat gain. So they're all the same, but slightly rotated, parametrically designed in order to limit, the heat gain and kind of really control the light into those atrium spaces. But you can see how it stacks up, and then you can see at the base of the building how that base is a lot of the public spaces, like the cafeteria and the fitness center, and how those kind of blend into those protective gardens around the base of the building. Another view of those gardens with the stairs. We really try to encourage active use of the building for wellness. I was just talking to Professor Bennett right before the lecture started about, the importance of human health and wellness is really the future of building design. And we've almost moved on in our practice from doing like LEED checklists and thinking less about, just mere carbon reduction and more about the experience of people and health of people, in these spaces. It's paramount, at least to the projects that I'm designing. Another view of the atriums, integrating those stairs. But you can really see the quality of the space and the kind of transformational space we're trying to create for the ministry. And of course, around this building, so we have the one kind of central building, kind of the major statement on the site, but there was a series of buildings we had to do around the whole thing. You have to solve parking, you have to solve security, you have to solve logistics and do helipads and all kinds of bunkers underneath grades in order to make it work. And a lot of these we hid in the landscape. So we had the landscape travel over the roofs of these buildings, clear stories to bring natural light into the space, but they feel more part of the landscape than a building competing, with our central form, which, you can't always do, but if they have the budget to do that, it really makes this singular volume unique, not surrounded by a series of kind of boxy buildings for these functional things, such as, massive parking garage for people coming here. Talked a lot about governmental operational excellence. So a lot of the language they were looking for about how to make sure they were efficient in use of the space and how everything was convenient to everything else. But it really came down to, this pure form in the desert. And a lot of times when we do renderings, we try to do these kind of sunny, happy sort of renderings, to its clients, especially developers, who would say, oh, we want it on a nice sunny day and everything looking perfect. But I'm very interested in these moody sort of images and these moody sort of feelings, during a sandstorm, like when we designed in Moscow. What is it like during the winter? How do you reflect the environment in the imagery when you're discussing the ideas and discussing the story about the building? It shouldn't just be on a pristine Washington, DC day, but really inhabit kind of the lighting and the mood of the place, in the renderings. So this one was a little controversial when I first started discussing this rendering in-house, but we really wanted to get the feeling, because sandstorms are there often in the desert, and how would this building react to the sandstorms? How would you clean the building? And I got into many conversations with the client who started showing images like this. A source of pride for their future. So once again, we designed a tower, that got on their money. So I'm envisioning, this building could be kind of that symbolic thing for the country. So really getting into, so when we did this competition, showed them the animation, showed them these kind of renderings, but every kind of competition like this is accompanied by a report. On this one, we had to do like a 200-page report defining everything. I just want to give you guys a glimpse of the kind of the more detailed ideas behind this and how it ties to things. So the first thing is, how do you, when you think about tying to a place, Riyadh as a city, is having this whole movement right now called Green Riyadh, where they're planting, a huge number of trees, really trying to green up the country physically, with these new parks they're introducing. So we tied this project to that greening effort, this plotted desert, really having it lush and green as much as we could with our water budget. We allowed for sustainability, but tying to their message. And here's some of our planting images of taking regional, native, drought tolerant flowering plants, which would flower when the few times it rained a year, and integrating that, into the regional solution. So for me, landscape is hugely important to tying the space. And I've always been pushing this school to tie to the landscape department, how you have that synergy between architecture and landscape, between indoor and outdoor, blurring those spaces. It's been really important for the companies I've been designing with, the organizations I've been designing for, Silicon Valley especially. If you have the right environment, tying those outdoor spaces to your workspaces, bringing the workspaces outdoors with outdoor workstations, how you can do that really appeals to retain employees and to attract new employees. I'm sure all of you can agree, having those type of spaces will be important as you're starting to think about where you work and where you want to spend your days. And then tying it, to the history, of architecture in that region. So I did my research. King Solomon, who's the king of the country right now, came up with these pillars of architecture. So the king is interested in architecture. So he had these Salmani pillars, which I found in my research. So I tied the building across to, I think there were 12 Salmani pillars of architecture, and I tied to as many as I could, taking photographs on my many trips there. So these are all photographs I took, but thinking about how to tie, traditional architecture had these monolithic sort of masses. So you can see, the walls had very little penetration. They're kind of these big monolithic earthen mass, and how that relates back to what we're doing. And we continued with the narrow openings, kind of the triangular openings in traditional architecture. I toured this archaeological site outside of Riyadh one time, and how that ties into the forms of what we're doing. Shade, shade structures are extremely important. Traditional shade structures were lattice works or trellises out of wood. And we're taking a different approach of actually having that building cantilever and making that shade around the structure. Courtyards are very traditional space because of privacy. So when we design housing over there, a lot of times it's courtyard housing, very solid on the outside and very glassy on the inside to provide that privacy for families, but also in public spaces. These internal courtyards are a very traditional way of building there. So that responds to how we organize the building. And then just to go over some of the campus requirements. So number one, is the main building, but to show you the series of buildings that we had to solve in order to establish the site, from the security and entry points to the parking and garages, to logistics around the building, and levels of security and zones of security around the building. All of this was tied to the wadi and sort of our natural progression on the site with physical security. Diagrams about how we design the wadis around there. Naturally we modify them and enhance them as part of our design. So how it makes this building feel like it's sitting in the park, working with the existing water elements and enhancing those water elements in the entry sequence to the building. How circulation and transportation works around, how you come to the site, how you approach the building. We have this formal access coming to that corner, that cut corner in the building, how the drop off works, how you get to the garage, all these things which you guys work on in your design. So the same things when you do a competition or designing buildings. And then a series of diagrams of how the floor plan, goes from the top, which is very wide, and shrinks as it goes down, and how those courtyards or those interior atriums condense as you get down through the building, solving all the programmatic elements. So you can see the different departments and different colors, and how that works as you come down the buildings and where everything was organized. Until you got down to the base and those gardens at the base. And then, for the whole interior design narrative, we talked about that collaboration space and how you create those moments of collaboration. And what we did is we took one small portion of the building and showed them multiple ways about how to fit it out, how to organize the space, just to give a feeling for how it might work. So we had 3 different schemes about how to do that, whether this is that one little part. The key is in the upper right-hand corner about if you want to have central collaboration space among the workspaces. So have all the offices lining the exterior and have the collaboration kind of in that middle zone, and some examples of what that may look like, versus distributed collaboration, having those collaboration areas, around the space. So each different pod had their own personal collaboration area. And then we had a third example, which was called the continuity of government. Say there was an emergency going on in the country and they wanted to quickly transform the space into a different sort of environment, of ways of reorganizing the furniture to make this effect where people can gather together behind big screens. And you think about a war room kind of environment, what that might look like for the workspace. We showed them, some examples of these kind of things with large kind of tech screens where people can organize in case of a national emergency. And then, of course, we got into all the tectonics of the building, how it's going to work. So thought about the exterior skin, the wall sections. This one was, we were doing glass fiber reinforced concrete, and how that skin sort of permeated as it went from the bottom to the top to minimize the heat gain. So the smallest openings at the top, and it got larger as it came down. Really started thinking about costs and how this was going to be put together. Different modules of this rain screen cladding the building, and how it's going to be all come together. And then we have internally at HOK, we have structural engineers internally to HOK. So the systems about, the truss systems, how it's all going to be held up, how you were going to achieve the cantilevers, all that was heavily detailed in our report, so they could understand the systems behind it, and how it was actually going to be constructed. And then one of the things we deal with on day one, is sustainability, and wellness. As I mentioned, we use our San Francisco group, which is really an interesting group about how to model this building, to talk about heat gain, to talk about the sun's effects. So if you did a traditional straight, building, how the heat would hit the building versus if you canted it, what that would do to reduce the energy intake of the building. And then, how we parametrically modeled the windows to get the most light into the building while also protecting it from the sun. And here is their study on our skylights. I said the skylights were each very detailed in its modeling about how the light would come in, how we kind of filter the light down, through different seasons, and how, each of those skylights is faced slightly different orientation to make sure the light in the building is beautiful, but also very functional and doesn't cause too much heat. How that works in the section. So you can see, where you might get some glare and where you would have just comfortable space. So the blue is like the most comfortable space in there, light. And then, in that central space, we saw those kind of funnels coming up in the middle of the building, and we really modeled how that would work for the airflow, working for circulation of air. And so in the top of the space can actually be very hot because no one's occupying there. So how you draw the air up and expel it through the atrium. We had PV integrated into the roofs, major roofs, so huge areas for photovoltaics and energy production, on the building. And then the final renderings again. So I know they got really detailed, but it's really, I want to show you guys an example of how you take a specific program, a specific site and project, and integrate some of the ideas so it's less abstract and really kind of a concrete example of how to take, these regional strategies and tie them together on a building. I think that's one of my favorite renderings of it, at dusk, starting to light up. You can see kind of the different patternings on the facade and how the light kind of morphs across the building across different times of the day. My final slide is this one about how these ideas are really catching on. I was recently interviewed by Fast Company, about these very topics, about how to take the ideas of old traditional homes and apply those to modern structures. But of course, there's also many publications out there about regionalism, critical regionalism. I think this is, the future of architecture, and especially the future of building abroad. So I thank you for your time and attention, and I'd like to open up for questions.
Question for you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed myself. I don't know if anyone else is. Very, very impressive. And as I'm sitting here in the audience, I'm feeling like if I'm overwhelmed, I wonder if some of the students might be feeling a little overwhelmed. Just the vast amount of knowledge, expertise that you're communicating here. It's amazing. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how your firm structures the production of such an amazing competition entry in terms of partner level, associate level. How might the interns get involved in a project of this scale in order to kind of learn and to jump into this?
That's a great question. So, of course, you need a lot of people to work on something of this scale. So I talked about how we use multiple offices, but also different levels of people within the firm. So I had one guy who was like the master of parametric modeling. He did a lot of the facade sort of studies, and a fairly new guy out of school. A couple years out of school, but has those technological and software skills to really learn that. And then, of course, we brought in a lot of younger people just to work on the project as we're going through it. It takes, while you have, I'd say there was 3 of us kind of senior designers on the project. I was head of the design team. I had 2 principal level designers underneath me working on different parts. One worked on kind of the guts of the building, the plans, and one worked more on the forms. But then beneath that, there are probably, 10 different architects working on this over the course of the 3 months we did this. This was a 3-month competition. So that's why we had to branch out to all the different offices to get it done in that limited time, especially with the animation. So we hired this firm called Tomorrow out of Stockholm, Sweden, to do the animation. But they wanted, 2 months to do the animation and like $1 million or whatever to do the animation. So you have to budget, all that time and get the design done with enough time for them to produce the animation and the visuals. It's complex and it's long hours. But these sort of competitions are really worth it to like flex your design muscles. It's a chance, instead of just doing local developer work, which is very rewarding, but tends to be slightly conservative and financial based. This is a chance to really sort of think about ideas. And I find it's really inspiring for the studio. We do 1 or 2 of these competitions a year, really to get ideas flowing. And look, even if we don't win this, it's worth doing it because we take those ideas and apply them to our other projects.
Thank you so much. So kind of piggybacking off of like what students can do and what interns and lower level, like newly young architects can do. When you go about like learning and gaining such a body of knowledge, how would you recommend students to go like learn about stuff like this? Because generally there's this like, because of the like age of the internet, there's this whole era of like information overload, and you don't know what's good, what to read. You have too many books to read, and as a student, very little time. So like I personally like to read a lot of books, but still human. Like in terms of like things like environmental psychology, just like, what are your recommendations?
That's a question. So one of the things I recommend when you start out working at a firm, when your first full-time job coming out of school, it's just listen to everything going on around you. And that's why I really encourage people to come into the office. I know during the pandemic, it was hard and we mostly worked remote for a couple of years. We're back now 3 days a week. You can come 5 days a week. And I encourage young people to come in all those 5 days. Because a lot of what you learn is not just formally through when someone's giving you a credit at your desk or when someone's giving you an instruction about what you need to draw next, but it's what you overhear. You overhear the conversations of senior people talking in the studio, working out design problems. You listen to what's going on. I mean, I think I'm pretty annoying in the studio. I don't sit in an enclosed office somewhere. I sit right in the middle of the studio and I'm constantly presenting to clients. And I was always worried that I was bothering people. But recently I've had people come up to me, young people we recently hired, and said, well, that was great. I was listening to you present and it's really informative to learn about what's going on. So I try to pin tons of stuff up on the walls around the studio, doing charrettes out in the open. People can see what's going on and just learning, because architecture, I mean, for me, architecture is a fantastic profession because you keep on learning throughout your life. I mean, you could be 70 and just hitting your stride, what you're designing. And, Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Guggenheim Museum in New York, toward the end of his career. So it's really that journey, and you're constantly going to be challenged throughout your career. But it's listening when you're young, and it's just such a steep learning curve. When you first come out of school, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to build a building or detail a building. So it's just taking advantage of the senior leadership, asking a ton of questions, never being afraid to go ahead and ask. I mean, what I look for when I hire people are just people with curiosity. People who are really interested in the world, don't necessarily have the skills yet, but have that passion for architecture. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's really awesome. I have two questions. One is to pick back on the previous question about you sharing about a technique when partnering with local designers. How does that work in terms of different language, different culture, different design style? How did you go through the process to pick your partners? That's the first question. The second question is, I think I remember you said that some of the project, you have the material shift from everywhere in the world. How does that stand in the sustainability aspect?
So for your first question, how we pick local partners, it depends on the project. It really depends on the specific project, whether you want to integrate them early on and have them part of the design solution, from the start. So, because they understand the local market, they understand the local ways of building. You really want to integrate kind of the local experts. If you're designing, when we were designing in Korea, we thought about what kind of local talent was there to construct things. Are they good in metalwork? Are they good in woodwork? What kind of things can we integrate into the project from the local community? They have the knowledge of that. So sometimes we integrate them very early on the design team. They tend to, most of our partners tend to, do speak English, even though language is limited. But as I was saying, it's kind of a universal language of drawing. So when you meet with them and we fly over there, I try to meet in person. It's much better than virtual meetings. You get to know each other, you can really understand each other. Kind of those casual conversations are almost more important than the formal presentations, where you really get to know them and people feel more comfortable speaking to you in a kind of off the record talk than in front of a huge group. And then you really start getting the ideas flowing and understanding, contributions can come from everywhere. The alternate way of doing it is as the US based design firm, we might design it through, a bridging documents level, through the end of design development, 60% done, and then hand it over to a local team to do the construction documents, because we're not always licensed in every country to stamp the drawings and produce the drawings. So if you do it that kind of thing, then you work in reviews of their drawing sets. You fly over there when they hit certain milestones to review what they've been drawing and talk to them about the detailing, and if the detailing reinforces the original design. Does that make sense? And you had a second question I've already lost.
The second question is about sustainability aspect. So
right.
about the material that shift everywhere, transportation, cost, human involved.
Yeah, so that's a tricky one because you can't get all your materials locally, even if you wanted to. We try to get local materials and use local materials. So we try to use local stone from local quarries and things like that. But just for the quality of production and for cost reasons, it doesn't always work out. When we were doing those 200 buildings in Saudi Arabia, for cost reasons, the glass coming from China was the most affordable. So that's what we use. So it's a balance between sustainability, and we're not paying for the project. You have clients paying for it. So you have to balance the cost of these things. Of course, we try to get everything, from the local environment. If you're doing concrete structure, we might even on a massive project establish a concrete plant on the site in order to produce things. But if you're doing steel, it's always based on cost and where the steel is going to be shipped from.
I have a question back here. My name's Odine Pierre Canal. Very good presentation, especially with the graphics. I'm curious to know what rendering software would you recommend us to use to try to get these type of graphics? And especially what type of softwares would you recommend for us students to grasp on for the work field?
Great. So visualization. So what we have in-house, in our offices down in Georgetown, a team or a couple of people who just concentrate on visualization. And my philosophy is they're part of the design team. It's not like you just design everything in Revit and then you turn it over to the visualization guys. They need to be integrated early, because what we're conveying, our language of conveying things are through these images, and that's the story, and that's the lighting and the emotion of the visuals are extremely important. So we integrate them early, and we try to get them baked into the narrative. So the visuals back up the narrative. The story is all being told back and forth between the two. The names of the software, I'm not going to be the right person to ask. I mean, we do a lot of 3D modeling in Rhino and Grasshopper for parametrics. We write scripts for all that stuff. Lately, I would have to check with my visualization guy. So what he's been doing, which is fascinating to me, is building the whole thing in a gaming engine, which is sort of the latest way of doing it. And then we can get unlimited rendering. So it's not like he just designs a single rendering and then photoshops it and then it's like a static image. He designs the entire environment in a gaming engine, and then we can do animations out of it. We can get hundreds of renderings out of it. You can take multiple views and then see everything at once. I know he uses 3D Viz Max, but I can't remember the latest program. I mean, we're sort of on the cutting edge of some of these programs, and we're working with the software industry, which isn't really focused on architecture. They're mostly focused on gaming and Hollywood and things like that. But we're partnering with them for the latest technologies, because it's super important, and not just doing static images, but doing the goggles, doing immersive environments, getting people to walk through the spaces. It's really important to selling things. Even for sometimes I've gone to interviews and we haven't been allowed to bring a physical model. I love bringing physical models too, because then people can crouch down and look at it and really get engaged and involved. That's what you want. You're not allowed to bring a physical model. Recently, for one project, we brought a hologram. So we said, all right, we didn't bring a model, and we just projected the thing, in the room, and then can apply the sun and the wind to it and things. And it was just wonderful. And the whole jury took out their iPhones and started taking pictures of it. And we knew we had it, right? Because you're engaging with the client. But for me, technology, it's super important and really the future of what we're doing. And we should really enjoy it.
Roger, it's a stunning presentation. The form world seems to have a lot to do with the linear city that's being built, I understand, in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be many miles long, and it's basically a narrow courtyard with curtain wall buildings and nothing else.
Working on that.
Is it coming along? Does it look the way it's depicted?
Will
this be?
So I'm not worried. It's called the Line. It's part of Neom. It's on the west coast of Saudi. And yes, we were hired to work on a portion of it, the university section of it, which is about a mile long. I personally didn't work on it. I had some qualms about it, as an urban strategy, kind of the stratification, because you're right. It's two kind of towers surrounded a single street, which goes on for like 100 miles. I mean, that's the idea of the line. And all the transportation, there's no cars. So all the transportation is a high-speed rail beneath it, and all services come in beneath it. The exterior of the building is all mirrored glass. So apparently, it's supposed to disappear in the natural environment. So it doesn't mar the natural environment, but just reflects it. And then all the life is in the interior. I think the challenge is, at least the original idea by Morphosis, is that the top elevation of the whole line is consistent, and the buildings get taller or shorter based on the topography it goes on. Which seems, when it gets super tall and it's 1 block wide, how do you get natural light down into the middle? Because there's no penetrations in the exterior. It's just glass in the exterior. How do you get air and light into that space and not make it discernible? How do you make it, a place you would actually want to be? And how do you get the different levels? Like, you don't want the rich at the top and the poor at the bottom. Like, how do you rank this into an actual society to live in? I think it's some of the challenges of that we're trying to grapple with by hanging gardens on different levels and ways to really bring the light down and making the bottom a big park, for communal use. But it's a challenging project for sure.
Be interesting to see both projects.
Yeah. We will see. I don't know the future of that, but I think they're planning to at least do segments of that, the initial segments. He's supposed to attach, from what I remember, it's attaching kind of the beachfront to an international airport 100 miles away. And it's just like a new paradigm. Instead of having the city sprawl, having the city be linear.
Yeah, I had a question. I've been working at an architecture firm for about a year now. I came here, and one thing I realized working is how often your design come in conflict with your ADA and also just like programming. And so I was wondering, how challenging was it to have such a pure form and fit all the programming in it? Were there times where in the design process you had to, sacrifice something that you really wanted, or were you able to manage, keeping all the program requirements within the triangle?
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, that's always a challenge, right? Yeah. I mean, because you come up with a vision, and then you have all the reality of how to make it. Not just the program, which all has to fit. I mean, so we planned the kind of scale of it based on the program. We didn't have a constraint about how big the building could be. So, we could expand it or contract it to make sure the program fit. But you also have to, make sure the structure works and the engineering works and all of that. So as we start, basically, when you have, the initial concept on any building, not just this one, even if it's a much simpler building, it's how to keep that idea alive as you go through the different phases of design. And that's why I think it's important to have the designers start at the beginning of the project, take it all the way through the end. And as we were talking about bridging documents or turning it over to another firm to finish the document, even if you do that, stay involved with the project and review and keep it up. Even in construction, there's so many issues that get resolved and so many things that get decided on in construction that to make sure that that idea isn't lost. Because if the designer's not involved, during design development, when you have all the mechanical and structural and civil and MEP engineers, start getting involved in the project, everything gets watered down and everything gets lost. You have to bring it back to those original ideas and why was the building formed this way? What were the major structures that were put in place to make sure that doesn't get lost by the end of the day. Those are the most successful projects when that original idea is in the detail, it's in the whole overall party, is it across the whole thing. So that's our role. That's our role as architects. Sort of lead the design team and make sure as all the different disciplines come in and want efficiency, they want cost, that the original idea doesn't get lost. So, I mean, I hope that answers your question about program, but it's about everything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is everything. Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, and just wondering how you manage that and keep that alive throughout the whole process, even including, when you get to CA and
It's hard. Yeah, that's why you don't sleep a lot. You just you kind of live these projects, especially, I mean, I was mentioning, I think I forgot to mention, we also use our Hong Kong office on this. So, that's 12 hours difference. So while I was sleeping, they were awake working, and, vice versa. So I would wake up in the morning, at 6 a.m. and have like 15 emails from my Hong Kong office of questions. And, so we work 24 hours a day on this, basically between the two different time zones in California and all that, to make these kind of things work. So you put your heart and soul into it. But I think people recognize that. I mean, I think people know the schemes. When we had this competition and there were 6 different firms, there were some schemes that people were like, yeah, they didn't try that hard, or they didn't really have their soul into it or whatever. And there's certain schemes where you can tell people are passionate about it. And it's those passionate projects that usually end up winning.
Thank you.
I have a quick question about what kind of clients you're willing to take on, and how do you decide if they're, I'm back here in the back.
Oh, there you are.
If there's any, particularly with clients like the Saudi Arabian government and state, is there any client who your firm would be uncomfortable taking on? Are there any sort of like moral or ethical red lines when it comes to who you're willing to work for? Obviously, you can mention a lot about these particular clients, but I'm sort of curious in general, if you draw that red line at all, if you feel that as a firm or as an architect, that's something that you should be cognizant of, particularly with a case study like the Ministry of Defense and all the current wars they're involved in. Like, do you ever think like we're helping that on or facilitating that, or is that not necessarily a consideration of HOK and you in particular?
I mean, of course, it's a consideration, and every project. So we're approached by many clients, for work, and we chase a lot of work like this competition. And anytime we choose, we have like an executive committee at the head of our office in DC, where we review the projects that each discipline leader wants to go after. So in my office, we have a head of science and technology who wants to do labs. We have a head of healthcare who wants to do hospitals, and we have a justice group that does courthouses. And so we have all these different people who want us to chase different kinds of projects that we meet as a group, and we decide like a go, no go about what we want to pursue. And we discuss things. I mean, we discuss if we think we have a good chance of winning, if we discuss moral and ethical kind of issues about, what kind of projects we want to take on. We discuss all kinds of things about if we have the right team to pursue it, if we're overworked. I mean, there's all kinds of considerations about choosing the kind of work you do. But of course we think about.
And so I'm curious, as like a follow-up, what would those red lines necessarily be? Like, what like sort of examples of a client or something that you'd be unwilling to work for? To me, this seems like one who I'd personally be uncomfortable. So I'm just curious, like.
Well, this one we definitely discuss. I mean, and as I sort of said in the opening, Saudi Arabia has been a strategic partner of the U.S. for many, many years for reasons. And we need a presence over in the Middle East, and there's options of who to align with. And, that's way above my pay grade, but it's one of our traditional partners. Aramco, the big oil company there, stands for Arab American Oil Company. I mean, like we helped them with the technology from the start. So, I had no moral problem with this project. I don't know if I can give you examples of ones we said no to. It's probably not appropriate, but there's definitely lines and things you want to consider as you're going after projects, and that's up to you and your firm to make those decisions. Sort of a downer for a last question.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Really, it's helping me.